Welcome back to Hidden Treasures. Today we're going to talk about faith, and it is one of my favorite things to talk about. Have you ever heard the saying, heroes of the faith? A lot of people refer to Hebrews 11 as the faith chapter. I've often heard that, and I've wondered, how did they get there? How do you have faith to walk up to the Red Sea and have it just part? Or how do you have faith to strike rocks and have water come out of them? And I would like to talk to you a little bit about that today. In Matthew 13:31 through 32, I want to read this to you because it was really good and I didn't want to get it wrong. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. When indeed it is the least of the seeds, but when it grows it is greater than the herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches." And when I read that, a couple of things really stuck out to me. And one small step. I think sometimes we look at the enormity of all the stuff that has to be done, and we think, how am I ever going to get from point A to point Z? And the Lord is just saying, do the next step. Do the one small thing I've put in front of you, and in my hands, in God's hands, that can produce such great fruit. The mustard seed is the smallest seed, but when it grows, it can grow up to 10 feet high and 10 feet wide, and it's a shrub. It's not even a tree. And the other thing, when I was studying for this that the Lord brought to me, was the birds. One of the things that stuck out was the birds of the air nest in it, and I looked up that word nest, and it actually meant to dwell or encamp or pitch a tent. And the Lord spoke to me and said, as we grow in our faith, that He can transform us to the place where we can become a refuge and a place of safety for other people on their journey that maybe are not as far along as we are. And I desire to be that for people, that they can come and they can nest and they can rest and they can grow in their own faith. But again, how do we get there? How do we get to the 10 feet tall and the 10 feet wide? In Matthew 17:20, it talks about if we have faith, so we're back to the small mustard seed. If we have the faith the size of a mustard seed, we can move mountains. I love that scripture because it talks about the amount of our faith. And I think we get in the mindset of, how do I get more faith? I need more faith. I need more faith. How do I get that? Well, this scripture clearly says it's not about the amount of our faith. And one of the lessons that I learned was about this. And there used to be a saying that we used to say at Grace Church all the time about, it's not the amount of our faith, but the object of our faith. And at that time, I was pregnant. And I was pregnant with my daughter. And to make a really long story short, we had a child when we were first married, my husband and I, and he passed away. And then we experienced 7 or 8 years of infertility. And then I got pregnant and I had a miscarriage at the end of my 3rd month. And then I got pregnant with Gracie. So I had a lot of legitimate, if you will, fears about being pregnant and being able to carry that to full term. And because our first child was born prematurely. So I'm in my 7th, towards the end of my 7th month of pregnancy, and I go into labor again with Gracie. And I spent some time in the hospital. They sent me home with some medicine. I spent a week in the hospital. They got the labor under control. They sent me home with medicine. And I took the medicine for 2 or 3 days, and I started to have an allergic reaction to it. And so the doctors were telling me, you've got to quit taking this medicine. And I was like, no. I mean, all I was doing was itching. And I thought, I will itch for the next, I think at that point I had 7 more weeks to go. I'll itch for 7 weeks. And they're like, you can't do that. Your body's rejecting the medicine. It's going to harm the baby. You've got to stop taking this medicine. And I remember going to bed that night, I was so consumed with fear. I was so scared. And I remember laying in bed crying and the Lord saying to me, all your faith is wrapped up in this pill. What about me? What about my goodness? What about my faithfulness to you? What about my faithfulness to this child? And he said, quit taking the medicine and trust me. And I did. And I did it afraid. I did not have this overwhelming confidence that it was all going to be good other than God was speaking to me. And so I quit taking the pill. Long story short, Gracie is alive and well. And so it was a lesson that has stuck with me. And so whenever I'm facing a mountain, he brings that back to me that I can't drum up the belief and the faith for what I'm going through. And that takes me to my next thing is if you look up the word faith, I want to read some of the words that it uses to describe what faith is if you were to do a word study on it. And some of them are to be divinely persuaded, confidence, and probably my favorite is in-birthed. And so what that means to me is that when I'm abiding in Jesus, when I am hanging out with him and we're talking and I'm bringing my heart to him and I'm saying, I'm scared, I'm afraid, I feel hopeless in this, then he can start sowing things into me and he can start speaking things to me and he can in-birth the faith. Now, that night when I was laying in the bed, that was not the beginning of the in-birthing. He had been speaking to me for 7 months, and actually longer than that, because he had been speaking to me for years about the fact that he wanted to give me children and that infertility was not my end. That was not my story. And so I had that to fall back on. He was telling me, I want to give you children. I want to bless you with children. And so that in-birthed the faith in me and in-birthed the confidence in me that God was faithful and could do what he says he can do. And one of my favorite scriptures is the one in Mark 9:24, where a gentleman brings his son who is possessed by a conflicting spirit. And he said, Jesus, if you can, I believe it says, if you can, heal my son. And Jesus says, if I can, if you believe. And that gentleman came back to God and said, or came back to Jesus and said, I believe, help me with my unbelief. And man, if we can get there, that is relational. That is being real with God. I believe, help me in the places of my unbelief. So as we go into the rest of this tonight, I hope you guys will get a new take on what it looks like to let God birth the faith in you instead of you trying to drum it up, because it is a gift from God. If you go to Ephesians 2:8-9, that's the scripture that says, I have been saved by grace through faith, not of myself, but a gift of God. Our faith is not a gift we give to God. Faith is a gift from God to us. So remember that tonight as you're going, and ask the Lord to show you places where you're trying to drum it up, and ask him what he has for you and what he desires to birth in you tonight.